What is the fastest you have ever seen someone get fired? Story 1. 4 or so hours. When I was 18, I got a job at a grocery store along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day, we were training in the evening and one girl asked to go home. She said her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out, went to grab a grocery cart and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes, didn't even try to come up with an excuse, just, yep, I am, so I needed to leave early on my first day. Basically, he fired her. Story 2. As a teenager, I worked at a bowling alley. Within an hour, a new girl was fired on the spot for dropping a ball on the foot of a complaining patron. I guess you could say she got fired on her first strike. Story 3. Guy got hired, went through training and all that jazz. First day on the floor, he disappeared for 3 hours and then came back high as on like meth or something. A manager found him in the bathroom aisle, staring at himself in the mirror. Said manager looked at the cameras after firing him. The guy was there staring at himself for at least 30 plus minutes. I worked at Home Depot. He was in the aisle where we sell bathroom countertops and medicine cabinets. We also have mirrors in this aisle, and that's where he was, not in the bathroom. Story 4. Before their first day of orientation, I got hired for a manufacturing job through Manpower, a temp agency. Me and a friend of my wife were both supposed to start on Monday at the plant for a week-long orientation. She got into a fender bender on her way to orientation and called them to say that she'd be a bit late, that she just needed to wait on the police to give a statement. The manager told her not to bother ever coming in. Girl was torn up. She took pictures and the police report to the hiring manager, tried to explain things to the company HR managers, but no dice. She was fired before ever clocking in. Story 5. Worked in a grocery store for a while. A new guy took a lobster out of the tank and removed the elastic bands on its claws, then proceeded to put it back in the tank. The thing eliminated all the other lobsters in the tank. Story 6. 3 hours into the first shift. Guy lost it while serving an annoying customer in a grocery shop, throwing a cabbage at her. The manager came and told him to go home because he finished there. He wasn't surprised. I was standing next to him. It was an entertaining day. Story 7. I work construction. We had 2 new hires that were friends starting the same day. Boss told one to take a coffee order and come back. Took everyone's money and said he needed his friend to go with him because it was a big order. They never came back. Story 8. I called a temp agency to get someone to help me count inventory. They sent a guy over with a cast on his arm. That was my first WTF, but I went with it because we were just counting parts. Then I came back from lunch, and this dude was in my office chair, zoned out and drooling on himself with a can of air duster in his lap. I kicked him awake and escorted him out of my warehouse. Never used that temp agency again. Story 9. A 19-year-old kid got hired to work the seafood counter. See him twice and then never again. Asked a coworker what happened. He had closed seafood one night and was walking out of the store, and the 5 pounds of crab legs he'd stuffed down the back of his pants fell out in front of the closing manager. Story 10. Coworker. Smoked like every 40 minutes for like 10 minutes, then asked the boss if he could leave an hour early because he didn't take his lunch break. As my boss said, sure you can, but you don't need to come back. Story 11. This was just a summer job at a fast food place. We had a new girl start, and within 2 days it was apparent she was an idiot, and everyone knew that. You could already see the manager questioning his decision. Then on her 3rd day of work, she said she couldn't come in because her mom was in a car accident and in the hospital. Turns out that's an easy thing to disprove in a relatively small town. Story 12. Corporate chain restaurant. New server, age mid-30s. The 3rd day he was working, we had to fire him mid-shift. Why? Dude went into the public restrooms with other guests clearly in there using the urinal and started doing lines of blow-off on the edge of the sink. Story 13. About 35 minutes, I hired a guy to work for me as a quality inspector for merchandise headed to Walmart and Target. He bragged about everything he stole from his last job during training and how they paid him more than I did. Well, I'm not holding him back from all that money, so I had some big guys escort him off the property. Story 14. I was fired on my 2nd day as a line cook at a Mitzel's restaurant in Washington State back in the 90s. Turns out I was hired just to threaten the job security of a longtime line cook with an attitude problem, to keep him in line. He got the message and apologized to the manager, and I was fired for breaking a yolk when flipping fried eggs one time. I'd been a line cook for a few years by then and thought I was doing pretty good. I was taken out the back door and terminated on day 2. Happened in Oak Harbor back in the mid-1990s. So yes, I did find another job since then. I was pissed, but got over it quickly. Cooking for a living was hard work, standing in a hot kitchen for 10 hours at a time, going home splattered with grease, getting yelled at by waitstaff and management. I don't do it anymore. Story 15. This guy hadn't even started yet and just had his introductory email sent out to the whole company, which ended with incredibly explicit details about himself. He got fired before he even started. The email was, "So about me, I graduated from blank in 2011 with a degree in management of information systems. I work full-time for a company in town as a corporate network admin. I live alone in a vacuum, lots of good friends. I'm a nerd. I love video games, RPG, fighting, platformers. I watch anime every now and then and write music in my spare time. Slowly working on getting rid of my body fat, which has always been a trial, haha. I'm into leather and kink play. I like to make out, wrestle, rim, and fist on top of the normal stuff. I only play safe but don't discriminate against folks with HIV. I don't have a lot more context I can give as it all happened so fast. Somehow the company deleted the email from our cloud inboxes when this was sent, but not before a colleague grabbed a screenshot of it first. He was going to be a tier 2 tech for the IT company I work at a couple years back. He supposedly apologized profusely, saying his friend played a prank on him, but the damage had already been done. Jesus Christ, who goes out and sends emails that they like anime? Story 16. This was a while ago at my old job. New guy gets hired as a busboy. He was super annoying and tried to insert himself into everyone's conversation whether they wanted him there or not. It only took a couple of hours for the whole restaurant to hate him. I was working at the bar and he kept eating the bar fruit. I personally didn't care, but the manager did. Manager comes over and tells him to stop eating the fruit. He looks the manager in the eye and eats another piece of fruit. Manager says, "Really?" followed by, "Come with me to the office." New guy promptly replies with, "All right, man, calm down. I can tell you got that big dick energy for a good reason," followed with cliche wink and nudge from his elbow. In front of me and like 4 other employees. I wanted to slam my face into the ice bin. It was so cringy to witness. He promptly walked out the front door 10 minutes later without his uniform on anymore. The worst thing about it was the manager was an insanely laid-back guy. Hell, the whole restaurant was insanely laid back. You really had to try hard to get fired from this place. Had he not thrown in that big dick line, I'm almost positive he would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and kept the job. Story 17. Guy had been working a few days at a barn. Decided to smoke right by bales of hay. Manager saw him and fired him right on the spot. At farms, you don't fuck around with fire. Story 18. First day of work, he walks in, says, "What the fuck is up, dumbass?" to the guy that parked next to, didn't touch his new Camaro he bought since he got hired. The guy was the CEO of the company I used to work for, on a visit to our branch. Literally 10 minutes into his shift, he was signing release papers. Story 19. Coworker quit his job, great pay, great benefits to work in a radio repair place. I mean, gotta do what you love, and he was also a big radio enthusiast. Got fired the first day on the job for stealing parts for his own radios at home. Took him over a year to get back with us. Surprised they rehired him. He then got fired for being a security risk about a year or so later. Story 20. The IT crew at a large government office worked on a ticket system, meaning that the government workers submitted their problem online and one of the IT guys would pick it up on their end. The new guy just started his first day, logged into a computer at an empty office, and submitted a reinstall entire OS request so he could spend all day there. The manager decided to check in on him before lunch to see how he was doing, and he was completely asleep. Fired before they even finished his hiring paperwork. Story 21. Day 1 of training. Within the 6th hour of an 8-hour shift. Worked in an old crank handle service elevator at a private residential condominium for very, very, very wealthy people. We told him to just shut up and stare straight ahead. Don't speak unless spoken to, because old rich people are mean and don't care about you. Well, what's the new guy doing? Starts a conversation right away and asks the resident, "How much money do you make?" To be more clear, it was a 1920s skyscraper in downtown. Story 22. I used to do a lot of field work on site investigation programs. Basically, we'd hang out on a drill rig while the drillers took rock cores. We'd log the cores, take photos, do some downhole tests, etc. New engineer gets sent to the site and gets assigned the night shift. Some people love night shift, but most people don't, hence sticking the junior with night shift. After 5 nights, he calls the office and says he wants to come home because he's freezing and he hates it and he can't do it. Not clear to me if he quit or got fired, but it became plain pretty quickly that this job wasn't for him. I got pulled onto that program and I asked the drillers what the guy's deal was. They had a propane heater in the back of their van, and despite repeated invitations to sit in the back of the van, Buddy just sat in his truck all night and shivered. In the middle of February. Story 23. Spent my summers in college working as a laborer for a construction company. Anyway, we were doing a bunch of renovations in an active hospital, so noise and dust were a huge concern. We were a small crew, and just starting renovations on an area with a super tight schedule, so the company hired a subcontractor for some of the work. Enter these 2 clowns who show up to do some demolition work. Foreman gives them the talk about how they may be used to doing things a certain way, but this is an active hospital, so he'd rather the work take longer than for them to make a huge mess or a lot of noise. An hour later, we apparently got multiple complaints about the noise and the mess, so the foreman calls me up and says to go over there and clean up now, and that he'd be by shortly to see what the hell was going on. These dudes had dust and broken walls everywhere. I could hear them halfway down the hall just smashing away without a care in the world. The foreman shows up and we walk into the room to witness this dude standing on a pile of rubble, swinging a sledgehammer over his head at a brick wall that he's removed the bottom from. Somehow the rest of this wall is still hanging from the ceiling. I have no idea how. Guy wasn't even wearing a hard hat, apparently oblivious that at any moment that wall might give way and crush him. The foreman lost his fucking mind on these guys, kicked them out immediately, and got on the phone with their company and told them he didn't want to see these guys on site again. Lots of choice four-letter words were used, even threatening to fire the subcontractor entirely and get someone else to do the work. Story 24, heard this from a manager I worked with when I worked in fast food. There was this one kid who didn't show up for work. He ditched work often, so the manager called around, couldn't get anyone to fill in his shift, so she had to fill it for him. A few hours into his shift, the dude ditching shows up with his friends and orders food from that manager. She fired him on the spot. Story 25. Couldn't pass the simple test given at the end of new hire orientation. Yelled at the test facilitator when she wouldn't just take the test for him. Sounds like an engineer my company hired. He was a PhD and really hit it off with the guys in management. Had some female colleagues working under his direction, and he was an absolute dick, demeaned their work. Blamed them for things not working. Now my colleagues were excellent formulation chemists. He was brought on to lead a new formulation project and it wasn't working. He would tell them how to do it and it never worked. He kept blaming them for doing it wrong. My coworker got fed up and called him on his bullshit during a big meeting with a prepared presentation describing what they tried, how thoroughly they tried it, why what he proposed would never work, and an alternative solution. He was pissed, but the management guys were extremely knowledgeable and started asking him questions, and it was clear he couldn't answer. Turns out, his wife has a PhD too, and she pretty much did all of his degree work for him, both from a culture where women are not treated equally. He knew absolutely nothing. Not only that, but once everyone got to talking, it was clear just how massive an asshole this guy was. Sadly, my colleagues had to deal with this for months before everything was said and done. Story 26. Guy showed up to work on his first day with the smell of alcohol on his breath. 7 a.m. When questioned, he admitted to taking a couple swings on the way in to calm his first day nerves. Yeah, fired on the spot. Worked here for less than 20 minutes. Story 27. New director starts at lunchtime, goes to the cafeteria, pays for the first salad plate by weight, then goes back twice for refills without paying. Cafeteria has cameras, and the cafeteria manager talks to the partner in charge. New director was fired before the end of the day. Story 28. A week. I worked in a bar and a new girl started. At work, she seemed a little rough, but was fine. One day she finished a shift, sat at the bar and ordered a red wine with lemonade and ice in it. Not really relevant to the story, just shows she is clearly insane. Her boyfriend came in. They had a huge domestic in front of my manager and several customers, and she threw her drink over her BF and dramatically stormed out. Story 29. First week, he's called over to the unstaffed truffle counter by a customer. Hasn't been trained in truffles, so he just grabs one from the display case and sells it to the customer. He doesn't know the display truffles are made of plastic, and the customer has already paid $1.90 for it when he realizes. Still not sure if it was an honest mistake or if he was planning to pocket the money. Either way, fired. Story 30. I got hired as a long-term temp with one other person to do some basic data entry work at a major brand pretty much everyone has heard of, and it was at their corporate headquarters, so pretty prestigious. Anyway, we went through all of this onboarding stuff in the morning that required us to get photo IDs and figure out parking and all that stuff. Then after 2 or 3 hours, we were introduced to one of the employees in our new department who began going over what we were going to be doing. None of it seemed overly difficult, and I figured that while it was a new system I had never used before, I'd be able to work it out in a few days as long as I asked questions and took notes. And that was the thing that made me realize that the other person who got hired with me probably lied on her resume and was completely out of her depth. She didn't take any notes and didn't ask any questions, and whenever I glanced at her, I could see flashes of panic on her face. Well, lunchtime came, and when we came back, she said that another company had called her and offered her a permanent position, and she couldn't work with us any longer. Both me and the person training us knew what was going on, but I'll give the other lady credit for finding a way out without losing face too badly. The takeaway here is, yes, fake it until you make it can and does work, but you gotta be able to fake it. You can't fake faking it. Story 31. My sister was fired one day one. My dad had his own small medical practice and would hire me and my sisters as our first job to be his receptionist and file insurance claims, so we could get some workplace experience before we went job hunting in the larger world. My older sister worked for him in high school for a year. I worked for him for 2 years. Then it came time for my younger sister to take over. I brought her to work to start training and said the number one rule in the office was, at work, he's not dead, he's the doctor and the boss. She sassed him in front of a patient her first day with all the venom and sarcasm a teenage girl can muster when dealing with a parent asking her to do something. He fired her on the spot, and I had to drag her out of there. Mom told her at least she'd get paid for the couple of hours she managed to be employed. Story 32. This is the opposite route here, but I found it amusing. My boss was out of town, and I managed a tea shop near a Starbucks years ago. This kid came in, foreign, and said he was supposed to start today. We were hiring, and I trained him, etc. My boss came back 2 days later and had no idea. The kid was in the wrong place, but he stayed with us, hired on the spot without even applying.